Welcome back to Crank the Third. This is the show in which we explore the entrepreneurial and creative side of life post 50. Now, in this episode, we're going to dive into one of the most exciting and sometimes daunting questions faced by experienced professionals and entrepreneurs over the age of 50, or people who've been around the traps for about 3 decades. And for some, it's about shifting gears into a more purposeful direction. And for others, it's particularly about, if you're an entrepreneur or a company founder, you might want to scale back your business, but, stay engaged and do meaningful work on your terms. So what's next? That's the question that I think is a little bit daunting for people who have been around the blocks a few times. Now, whether you're looking to consult, advise, create, or shape a flexible portfolio career that blends lifestyle and legacy, this conversation, I think you'll get a lot out of, and it's all about designing that third chapter with confidence and clarity and intention. And to help us unpack what it takes to build a purpose-led, multi-dimensional career in your 50s and beyond, I have in the virtual studio Wendy Pavey, a Queensland-based brand and career strategist who helps seasoned professionals design and grow sustainable portfolio careers. Welcome to the show, Wendy.
Thank you, Trevor. I'm really happy to be here and share what I know with your listeners.
And you know heaps, you've been in this game for a long time, but why don't you give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch of how you got into this whole, personal brand strategy and career advice for people wanting take a portfolio approach to their career.
Well, my early work in brand was with iconic global consumer brands. And it dawned on me that there's actually a real parallel between those big global brands and senior leaders, business owners, senior executives, CEOs, in that those big brands are our biggest advertisers and sponsors, and that's because they know that they need to keep in front of you, otherwise someone else new and shiny will come along and they'll lose their customers. It's actually the same for people who have had this successful career, either as an executive or as a business owner. We need to be in front of people so that we have these opportunities, because if we are not visible and if people don't know what it is that we have done and we can do, then we're not going to be offered the opportunities. And as you know, Trevor, the underemployment of people in their 50s and 60s, I mean, that's a waste of talent and energy that our economy and our society just cannot afford. So I'm all about taking the lessons from what do those big brands do and apply them to people who they don't want to give up working, or they don't need to give up working, and they should not give up working.
Yeah, and while there is that, well, let's call it for what it is, a bit of ageism in certain types of industries where, the moment you've got a couple of grey hairs, you're out the door, without putting too fine a point on it. But it's really about, the opportunities for that type of person who has, got a fantastic track record, done a lot of things, got knowledge, experience, wisdom that's hard earned. The opportunities are fantastic as well.
Well, they are, but you do have to create the opportunities.
Yes.
I think this is not the time or the place to be passive, to be sitting back and saying, gee, I'd love to sit on somebody's board and then just wait for roles to be advertised, for example. I mean, I don't like that. I don't like anything about applying for jobs that hundreds and hundreds of other people are applying for. I think it's really wasteful of resources, and it is really damaging to your self-esteem and your sense of purpose, because the success rate is so low. So for me, it is again about marketing yourself, about looking for those opportunities and surfacing them. And getting really good at talking about what you can do and the value you can bring, drawing on that experience that a younger person just does not have. They don't have your scar tissue, as one client referred to it. So, this is how we leverage our decades of experience. That's the only way you get it, is having seen this industry take shape over decades, about understanding a sector, or a particular type of business,
Yep.
and knowing how you make that succeed in today's world.
Yeah, and as you sort of alluded to, it's about positioning yourself for that, being ready for the opportunities and ready to pounce when they do pop up. But not even conversely, the flip side or the other side of that, we'll look at these two concepts in parallel. Why don't you walk us through? I mentioned at the top of the show about portfolio career. Can you just unpack a little bit of that? What does a portfolio career mean to you? What's your definition of one?
So the way I see a portfolio career is one that is not centred around a full-time executive role or business ownership role. And it's almost always a mix of roles that might be governance boards or advisory boards, might be some mentoring, some coaching, some teaching. It could be some policy advocacy. It could be the possibility that there's 20 plus real options that I often put in front of a client who wants to explore what a portfolio career might look like for them. And it's really about thinking, what's the work that you want to do? Because typically when you get into your 50s and 60s, it's not about climbing the ladder or the greasy pole. It's actually about, how do I make an impact? How do I contribute what I know? It's not so much about how do I earn a high 6-figure or 7-figure executive income. So it's really about that mix of roles. It's about what is now the work that I love to do. What's the work that I'm really good at? And it lets you be very specific in many instances about just doing that type of work for a very specific or very, very clearly defined type of organisation or business owner, startup founder, for example.
And so I guess the beauty of it is that, if you've got a lot of skill sets and you don't really want to be doing the same thing all the time, that you're basically taking your experience, your knowledge, your wisdom, your connections, and you're pushing it out in different ways. So you've mentioned a number of whether it's consulting and advisory or mentoring or coaching or being on boards, maybe working with some startups, some non-profits. You could do training and speaking. I know with myself, when I first went down this path after sort of full-time consulting roles, I did a bit of consulting, moved more into coaching, then created training products and speaking. So that was kind of like my portfolio approach to work. But today, I guess, you can work more virtually and it's a lot easier today than it probably ever has been.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, the main attraction for the portfolio career is not only can you focus on doing the work that you love and that you're really good at, but you can do it in a really flexible way. Now, look at the rise of the interim role where you might go into an organisation for just a limited period of time. Maybe it's 3 months while they tackle some issue, or maybe it's as cover for something unanticipated. Or the fractional role where for an organisation that could not bring you in, for example, as a, say, chief marketing officer, their budget just would not have room for that, but they could bring you in 1 day a week or a fortnight and get that high level input and have a transformational effect on their business for a fraction of the price. And for you, you're not tied into 5 days a week. I mean, let's be honest, very senior executive roles are extremely demanding. Being a business owner, it's extremely demanding.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice if we could just say, well, for 1 day a week, I'll be all in and I'll work intensively on a particular business to achieve a clearly identified goal, and the rest of the time you can move between teaching, mentoring, or any of those other kinds of roles that perhaps may not be as well remunerated as when you're acting in that executive capacity.
Yeah, and the phrase fractional CMO or CEO or whatever, it's probably less to be a fractional CEO, but a fractional executive role. That's kind of new in the lexicon. I feel like I see it now, but it was only a couple of years ago you wouldn't even see that term. So I guess it's growing as this whole portfolio career type concept is taking hold. And the thing that I'm hearing from you, Wendy, is that it's not about working your butt off, controlling your hours, maybe having a more relaxed lifestyle, but still doing interesting things, probably more purposeful work than what you potentially were doing, and keeping things interesting. That's the hard part when you've done the same thing for a long time. Keeping things fresh and staying, up to date and relevant is something that's really important, I think.
Look, it really is, and it's something I think when you think about the way the working world was when you and I started full-time work, and what the role of a CEO or a business leader was then, and how that role has evolved. It's much more of a people leadership role as opposed to getting a business to grow, for example, for all kinds of reasons. That can be a difficult transition to make. And it can be really appealing that instead of maybe being in that leadership role where you do have to take almost that sort of pastoral care, you do have to be thinking about people's family responsibilities, about their mental health. And this can be challenging for people who were used to a different type of work. And they want to come in, they want to get something done. They don't necessarily want to have those pastorally caring conversations. So this can be a really nice fit instead of trying to adapt to a way of working and working with employees who have a completely different view of the corporate world. I know I find that challenging for myself, and I know my clients find that challenging as well. But instead of saying, well, that makes me unfit for corporate leadership roles, let's turn that into an advantage where you can come in that really targeted way and say, we're going to achieve this outcome, we're going to do it in this way. And it can be it's a really satisfying way to work, I think, for many people who are in their 50s and 60s.
Indeed. And let's talk about business owners too, because there's a lot of people out there who have grown their business, whether they've sold it and they've done an earn out or they just simply want to downsize. I know a couple of people who have run good businesses and had 10 plus staff, nice turnover, 7-figure businesses, and they just want to, because it's basically a lot of it's been around them, they're finding it hard to sell, and some are choosing to just ease it back and take sometimes it's a management buyout. So if it's more of a consulting thing and they've had a couple of people working for them for a period of time, they can sort of sell it to them over a period of time, be involved, continue to be involved, but then go off and do other things. So you're seeing much in the way of business owners taking this approach, this portfolio approach?
I absolutely am. But the scenario that I see more commonly is not about the one where you stay involved in the business, but the one where they say thank you and goodbye. That can be especially the case if you're handing over to second or third generation inside a family business, and it's like, oh, yeah, Grandma, just leave me to it. And while that can be a bitter pill, I think we can also appreciate that sometimes that is the appropriate thing to do. So it might be, well, for whatever reason, you don't want to, or there is no need to stay involved with this business that you've built up. But again, you have all that knowledge and experience. You think about the work you could do mentoring a startup founder, or going in on that kind of really targeted fractional approach to help a business to tackle a problem that you were able to solve. Or maybe there's something inside your industry sector, some sort of systemic problem that as a business owner you couldn't really tackle because it would have seemed too self-interested. But now that you're out of that business, you can go forward and you can advocate for the kind of change that is needed to tackle whatever the issue might be. Maybe it's something structural, maybe it's something that is policy based, something to do with workforce. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons, and that can be tremendously fulfilling work, which is all about legacy, isn't it? That
Indeed.
Something meaningful.
Indeed. I want to get into the sort of the personal branding and the positioning for it in a tick, but before then, there's a bit to unpack, isn't there, for people who are, again, we'll look at business owners who have, wanting to pull back and do something different, or, corporate executives or people who've been in the workforce at a senior level and have either seen the writing on the wall or they're keen to walk away and have a bit more of a lifestyle business around there in terms of their career. What sort of people do you see, and how do you walk them through these planning stages? What are they like at the point they come to you? Are they just confused? They need a shoulder to cry on. They need some hard talking to. What's a few of the types of people that your clients who are your clients?
Well, I'm not much of a shoulder to cry on, I'm afraid. I'm not a coach or a counsellor. I am a strategist, and my job is to move you from point A to point B. If I think there's some mindset issue that you need to tackle, then I've worked with some amazing people who are counsellors and who can help you. But I'm not that person. I think a really common scenario that I see, particularly with the corporate executive and the business owner who's stepping away, is they will say, I think I'm interested in board roles. And there's this sort of single-minded focus on the governance board, particularly for ASX Top 200. Well, that is probably the most challenging segment to try and break into. It's incredibly competitive, and boards are often looking for, shall we say, people who are not the usual suspects. So if you are in that category, then it's going to be extremely difficult for you to break in. And governance boards require a really specific set of skills. You don't necessarily have them. And perhaps, we don't want to look at the standards of governance inside our own organisations, but unless you run a big organisation, you probably are not really meeting those governance standards. I mean, that example you gave before of the person who's had, maybe 10 employees, for example, the kind of governance for you as a director of a company of that size is just nothing like what's happening in the ASX 200.
Yep.
So it's a stretch for you. It really is. So when I see that person who says, I'm thinking board roles, I will often begin with, well, what is it about the board role, about that function? And the answer we get to is, well, that's just what I've heard of. So the first task is for me just to open up their horizons and say, look at all these other possibilities, and to put them in front and have them say, no, definitely not, or, oh, I'd never even thought about doing that, and completely change their vision of what the portfolio would look like. And there's a number of lenses that I use, like the Japanese Ikigai model. What I like about that is that one of the segments of that model is, what can you be paid for?
Yep.
And it's one of the few models that does actually look at that. How do we make this commercial? Because most business owners place, rightly, a high value on the quality of their advice and the impact that they can have. So do you want to do that work for free? I do not like my clients doing work for free. I really don't. And I'm like, one pro bono role and that's it. And everything else, you need to be paid. You can donate that money to charity or even donate it back to the organisation, but you need to be paid for your time and for your expertise. Otherwise, I think that work becomes very unrewarding very quickly, especially if it's demanding.
So when you talk about boards too, I mean, the ASX, for overseas listeners, they're the mega boards, the publicly listed companies, and, there's less of those. But there are other, interesting board roles. The pro bono ones would be for non-profits, of course, but a lot of people do like to go into those ones and have a role in that. But, there are lots of advisory roles, even if they're not called board members. There's a lot of fast-growing entrepreneurial companies that have advisory boards, and it's a different role, of course, but it's kind of, you're still in the mix, you're advising, you're still playing a role.
Absolutely. The advisory board sector is growing very, very quickly. and the Advisory Board Centre, which is a global body, does a very, very research-driven organisation, and are really tracking this exponential growth in advisory boards, which the difference between a governance board, a governance board is a legal requirement. It's mandated that every publicly listed company has to have a board, and they have to have certain committees and certain functions. Well, an advisory board, which can sit alongside a governance board, but the advisory board, the remit can be whatever serves the corporate objectives. So maybe it's to look at something like a geographical expansion. Maybe it's to tackle a specific issue. In Australia, the aged care sector, it has now been mandated that aged care operators need an advisory board to look at standards of practice and to look at the customer experience, so that voice is heard at the highest decision-making level. And that's a great example of how, if you've got knowledge and experience in that sector or in an adjacent or relevant sector, you can come into that organisation and just be able to help them do a better job of, in that instance, caring for some of the most vulnerable people in society. But I've seen advisory boards constituted for very narrow purposes. It might be something like managing a merger or an acquisition, actually tackling everything from just the technical practicalities, how do we absorb them into our computer system, to how do we make that cultural change. And you can set up your advisory board for exactly that purpose and choose people on very, very narrow criteria that is very unusual in a governance board setting, where all governance boards are looking at that, compliance, and they're looking at risk management, and they're looking at a strategy oversight. It's a very different way of working.
Yep.
Advisory board, much more tactical, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting you say that's growing. It makes sense because, again, we were talking about how, there are people who are highly experienced professionals and entrepreneurs who are getting out of that day-to-day grind a lot earlier perhaps than they used to, and these roles are probably coming up to, there's a lot more people to, that's on the other side of the coin, there's a lot more people to competition in that regard. But it's good to hear that there are those roles, and I guess if you might be amongst a number of other peers and professionals who are of equal standing to you, and that makes it intellectually stimulating and challenging as well.
Absolutely. I think that can be something where you can experience your own growth as a professional and as a person in ways that you might not have anticipated, because you are operating in quite a different way than you had previously. And of course there's still the same requirement for ongoing education that about topics like AI, for example, that you know what's happening in a sector, in an industry, and you're required to stay current because you have to market yourself in a way that you possibly have not ever had to as a senior executive, and you certainly never had to as a business owner. You just kept employing yourself regardless of whether or not you had done any current study. I mean, that won't fly when you are having to present yourself to strangers to say, here are the reasons why you should choose me. And if you haven't done any formal study since, your undergraduate degree 35 years ago, well, one of my core recommendations to you would be that you immediately enroll in something to bring up to date those perceptions of you as a person.
I'm very interested still, the people that come to you and they probably are fixated with a particular idea, in this case boards, and that your role is to give them the array of options available. And, the more you dig into it, the more that, there are a large array of things. What are some of the ones that, when you did mention that some people say, oh, I never thought of that? Have you got a real life example there of someone who you put something in front of them and they said, oh, I'd never even thought about that?
Well, I think the opportunity to advocate, to shape policy for a business owner who has struggled with a certain issue for decades, that hampered growth, that made it difficult to attract employees, for example, to be now free to go into that policy setting and actually play that advocacy role to create change is something that I can think of one person who just was so energised by the thought of fixing something that had just been, like a thorn in their side for years. I think mentoring as well, which I always want to be done as paid. I don't like anyone doing anything for free, but to really formalise your approach to being a mentor. And when I'm setting someone up for that kind of work, we think deeply about who you are best placed to mentor, and this can really be some interesting exploration, like who can I really help and who can I not help, and how can I create an experience that is challenging but also a huge move forward for the mentee to get them over some challenging issue, to get them through a really difficult time in their corporate or business life. Yep. Again, immensely rewarding work that needs to be paid because it's demanding work.
Yes,
it's something that needs to be properly valued.
Yeah, I know someone he calls himself a coach, but listening to him, he sounds like he's more of a mentor. There is subtle differences, but I won't get into those here. But, he's got a clutch of clients that he works with, and they're becoming long-term relationships, and there's a monthly retainer involved, and he's got a pretty nice life, and he's helping people that he wants to help. And then I think he's got a couple of advisor roles on top of that, and only recently has started to do some speaking gigs. So that's a really nice rounded package. But I think he fell into that. But I think the days of falling into things, you can go around and round in circles and try and do a little bit in here, but having someone like yourself guide you and maybe even play devil's advocate and open your eyes to the opportunities, I think is well worth it for people.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you mentioned speaking, and that can be something that people have an idea that they'd like to do. Professional speaking, as you know, is incredibly competitive, and you really need a strong angle, as we say in the PR business, to attract that interest from conference organisers and event organisers to say, yes, we'd love to have Trevor on the stage speaking about that thing. And the standard is very, very high. It's not just speaking as in, reading off your notes standing in front of a lectern. It's much more of a performance.
It is.
So for me, speaking is going to be a certain type of speaking, and difficult in the absence of that big personality and some training to secure that professional speaking gig. But, I think about some of the other clients that have come my way who have been steered into directions that they hadn't expected. And for one, I recall, had such a beautifully simple, elegant process for creating a specific outcome. And what I worked with them on was actually articulating their IP. And making it into a thing, giving it a name, representing it visually, getting it trademarked. And then that was able to be deployed strategically in partnership with others to elevate the standard of practice inside that profession. Again, enormously personally rewarding for that individual, and something that most people actually have inside them. Just needs to be
brought out, and the IP.
Absolutely, because that gives you such a competitive advantage when you are looking for advisory board positions, for example, or any kind of advisory or consulting work, to be able to say, I have this methodology, I have this process. It just gives you so much more credibility and authority that you know this so well. You've been through it so many times, you can articulate it clearly. It's a huge advantage, in marketing, to be able to say, if you want me, you get this, and people can often be chosen on the basis of that.
I 100% agree, I think, and the people who can articulate that and package it and then communicate it, there's a few steps involved, but it is a powerful differentiator for a lot of professionals and solopreneurs, or solo practice owners, as they call them. What's the difference between, or is there a difference, or it might only be semantics? You've got the portfolio career where you advisors and coach and do all this sort of stuff, but then there's a lot of people that choose to build what I'd call an expertise-based one-person enterprise. So they are the brand, or they might have a business name. For some people, they always want a business name to hide behind. But, it might have some digital products. They might do some speaking and some consulting and a few other things, but they might create products. They might have a book and all of that. Do you see a difference between those, or is the portfolio career more about you, the personal brand, and then once you start building a one-person enterprise where you might bring some freelancers in or have a virtual assistant to help you, you're kind of building a bit more of a business with some products? Do you see any difference there, or you just see them overlap?
I think they do overlap. I tend to see less of the person who wants to create a podcast or a book or digital products, because my clients tend to come from either very senior corporate executive roles or that business owner that has stepped away from the business. And that can feel a little bit too much like being back into
Indeed.
Mm-hmm. Because it requires infrastructure, and as you say, it requires a VA, it requires some kind of people around you to help you get this work done. And that can be quite off-putting. Now, I do offer clients to work alongside someone who can help them with their marketing execution support, to do things that sometimes you don't want to do. Like, you don't want to send emails to people saying, I'm interested in this kind of work, can you think of anybody? But you can just outsource that to this trusted person, and that sort of takes away the ick of doing that kind of work, because it is essential. And if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to say to people, this is what I'm looking for now, do you have any suggestions for me? Then you're really going to struggle, because then you're back in that passive, sit back and I'll wait for this role to be advertised, and that may never happen, and there's the loss of everything that you could contribute that is so needed. So to answer your question, I think that there is a difference. Maybe it is subtle, and as you say, just semantics, but that's probably how I would identify that, as the person who was a little more entrepreneurial, and then it is about the personal brand comes to the forefront, and you build everything underneath that brand, and you'll still have that diversity of activity, as opposed to the person who, what I think of as is perhaps a little more corporate as opposed to entrepreneurial. Yeah.
Now, we mentioned earlier, and it goes hand in hand. I think I did say the flip side. It's probably not a flip side. It's more of a bookend. One is, obviously the planning, the strategic side of things, understanding the opportunities you want to go after, the types of, roles that are out there, etc., and whether you want to create as well, and maybe set up a mini business around you. So there's all that side of things. Obviously, people need to understand and set some goals around. But the other part of it is the non-negotiable, certainly in my mind, and you're probably the same thinking, is that you've got to have a personal brand. You've got to have, maybe you've got a reputation for what you've done in the past and that side of things, but have you got any visibility outside of what you've been doing? And I'll couple this with, and I'd just like to unpack the personal branding side of things, but I'll also couple this with the fact that You know, a lot of people, when they've come from a role that they've done for so long or even run a business, and this is coming from someone who, you know, ran a business for 10 years and then sold it, is your identity's tied up in that business often. And so there's this wrench between, you know, you haven't got that as part of your role anymore, and your identity might take a hit or it might change things. And that's why the personal branding and the process is really important. If you've sort of got a thinking around that side of things.
Absolutely. And it really is about reframing that so that it's interesting. I often see the person who has come from a company, maybe they've stepped down as a CEO or they've left a professional services partnership, and that brand has really subsumed them as an individual, and that can be very challenging to identity. That, oh, I used to be a partner at Deloitte, for example, or I used to own that business, and now you no longer hold that role.
Yep.
But you still have all the same experience. You just need to articulate it. You really need to reconnect with it in many respects. You know, I have put value at the centre of the model that I've developed for a personal brand, and because that's really what matters. Everything else is unimportant, but what is the value that you can deliver? And it's not about this is what I've done in my career. It's about this is what I can do for you now. And that's got nothing to do whether you are a partner in a law firm or whatever it might be. It's all about, you know, you and what you can do. For many people who've come out of that very rigid hierarchical partnership type organisation, it's enormously freeing to be able to say, I'm not tied to a certain way of doing it, or charging in 6-minute increments, or doing anything other than in the way that I believe in this situation is absolutely the best way that's going to get the best results. And that's a kind of flexibility that's got nothing to do with the amount of time or how you organise your working week, but it's all about how I can just get the best outcome for this business, for this founder, whatever that might be.
And then I guess it's the case of being able to show, not tell that, which is part of the personal branding process, whether you're creating content, whether you're on LinkedIn, whether you do write a book. Some people might want to write a book. I mean, I'm a big believer in the content side of things, to be able to demonstrate your chops and your point of view and what you stand for, and to be able to differentiate yourself without getting into the, you know, trying to beat the algorithm all the time, but, you know, stand your ground on what it is you are and what you do and stand for. But, you know, it is competitive too out there, and you've also, you know, people need to find you, discover you, like what you do. You almost need to repel people that you don't want to work with as well. There's a lot involved in the whole personal branding there's personal branding planning and the personal brand communications, isn't there?
Oh, there definitely is. And I think particularly for that corporate person, that you've never had to do this. So to have to market yourself, particularly if you have been in some structured organisation, or if you've just gone from corporate role to corporate role, perhaps with the assistance of executive recruiters, for example, you've never really had to articulate what is this specific value. But I almost always, for clients, that's quite a joyful process of feeling that sense of you're tethered not to some external role which could be taken away from you at any time for reasons that have nothing to do with your performance, but it's actually tethered to who you are as a person, and something that reflects your values and all those good things about having positive impact and changing things that we know need changing.
And it might, I guess on one hand, it feels scary, and it is, particularly if you have been, if you've been running your own business for a while, you've taken the leap, you're probably a risk taker to a large degree. But those people who, as you said, being in the hierarchical type of role within a larger organisation or a big consulting firm or whatever, it can be scary. I remember one gentleman, a friend of mine, who had been a chairman and a CEO of a very large marketing services company. And when he went out on his own, and he just couldn't believe that he just floundered for a while, that he had to do everything. You had to buy stamps, like there's that side of things. And, that's a challenge that everyone's got to face, because you haven't got the support around you unless you buy it in terms of a VA. But the other thing is, it's not necessarily safe anymore for people of senior people in organisational roles anymore. And people would say, well, that's the safety of being employed and all of that. But what we're finding today is those who are probably in the safest, most sustainable position are the ones with a strong personal brand and reputation. They have got a mix of roles that they do, so they're not reliant on one paycheck. And the risky part is probably putting your lot in now with one organisation, I would say.
I think that's true, and we've seen all kinds of examples of good people who lose their positions. And if you're in your 50s and 60s, that is increasingly difficult to regain another corporate executive role. I think what gives you real resilience in that situation is your network. That we tend to treat very, very casually until the moment when we need help, where we're met with some adversity. And the saddest conversations that I have are with that person who has just found themselves in a situation they had never anticipated, and they can't get work, they can't get an interview even, and the damage to self-esteem, the loss of identity, like nothing good comes from that situation. And it's almost always because their network has just been neglected, or they've never consciously said, who might I need to know? And they haven't gone about building what I call that network bank of goodwill, where over time you have stayed in contact with people, where you have contributed in whatever small way that might have been. Could be as simple as a quarterly email saying, how did you go with that project? Just those light touches. It doesn't need to be, we have to catch up with this huge event. People often don't have time for that. But networks are built on reciprocity and feeling like if I needed help, I have someone. I have several someones that I could say, I need help. And who can I turn to get that help? So, and this is something that you can do at any stage of your career. It's never too late to consciously say, I'm going to become more active. I'm going to get to know people. I'm going to connect on LinkedIn. I'm going to go to events for a professional association or an industry body. And just make yourself pleasant to people. You don't need to be dazzling them with a pitch or anything like that. Just to go along and to think, how can I make this a great experience for someone else? Not for me. And in those simple ways, just to be there and support people means so much. It does get noticed. People do know that Trevor's always there. He's always comes along to support these events. I see him pop up on LinkedIn, and he's always the one saying, good on you, congratulations, well done, great to see. Those things, they seem small, but they're not. They're so important and easy to do. Costs nothing, takes very little time.
It's particularly in aggregate, or it compounds, that those activities compound. I'm glad you raised that. I mean, we've all received direct messages on LinkedIn from people who are saying, we hadn't heard of for 10 years. All of a sudden they're starting to talk to you, and then you find out, they've lost their job, and they're in desperation state. It's actually like marketing or anything like that. You build your audience before you need it, and it's, if you've neglected, as you say, your network, and it's all been about you, and yes, you're busy, but everyone's busy, so take the time thing out of it. It's just obviously has never been important for you, but one day you're going to need that. There's always that saying, your network is your net worth, and I kind of believe that. But can do it virtually these days as well. We don't have to have a coffee catch up with everyone. As you say, that's pretty hard to do, getting people to commit to that. And it's not about pitching. I think you said that. It's not about the dazzling pitch. No, you don't want to be pitching. You just want to be reciprocity, the law of reciprocity. You help people and then they'll help you, maybe if you need it at some point.
Hopefully you won't need it.
Yeah.
But if you should, and even if you never do need it, I mean, isn't that what we love to do, is to be there and to cheer other people on and be that light in the room. I was speaking at a big event a few weeks ago, and even though I speak at events quite a bit, there's always that split second when you're standing in front of a big audience on a stage and all eyes are on you and your lizard brain is screaming, "Run away!" And in the audience was someone that I don't really know particularly well. I mean, we say hello and probably only catch up maybe once or twice a year. But she had a beaming smile on her face. And it's like the way that lifts you up, because in that presentation my slides didn't work properly, and I think when you're expecting that they will work properly and they don't, it does throw you off stride, and to look out and see that smiling face was, and I wrote to her afterwards and said, I can't tell you how much that meant to me, to see your smile beaming out in a big room full of people. But her response back to me was how much it meant to her that I had seen that and that had then acknowledged it. And I feel that the warmth of our relationship has increased by many degrees just because that mutual acknowledgement and appreciation. I mean, I feel like there's nothing I wouldn't do for her now if she asked me, because of the impact that she's had on me.
Human interaction, it's a wonderful thing. We lost it there for a couple of years and I think we're getting it back as people are rolling out to more events and doing a bit more face-to-face stuff. Wendy, this has been fantastic. I mean, it's such an important topic. And, when I was sort of doing my thinking around this, and let's unpack what a portfolio career looks like. But, as we've discussed, there is the branding of yourself, the positioning of yourself. You're putting yourself out there. You need to be visible. You need to be doing things that you probably never have done before. And that can hurt for some people. But also being, you can do a lot of these things before you sell your business, while you're still in your senior role. You can and probably should be doing these things, because that's your insurance, and that will help you, transition to a portfolio or a one-person type business down the track, should you wish, or should you have to do it at any point in time. Any sort of last tips on, that was just my little wrap up for it, but any last tips from your point of view for people who are in that position that they want to, a bit more of a lifestyle change, do a bit more purposeful work, some things that they need to think about, or books they should read, or that side of things? Obviously follow you on LinkedIn and get your content on that side of things.
Well, what you've just said would be my number one tip. Start immediately, because it does take time to successfully transition. I like a 12-month runway to transition someone from a full-time corporate role or business ownership to be, with the maybe not a fully developed portfolio career. That might take 2 or 3 years, but to know that you're really well positioned for it, maybe to have that initial role or two so that you can see how this is taking shape. Because the other thing is that, and I've seen this over and over with governance board roles, is that I might have a CEO client who comes in and we get them onto a governance board because they've been CEO of big name company, and they find themselves in this sort of collegiate decision-making environment, one amongst 7 or 8 other people and lots of board papers to read, and they can't stand it. They're like, I'm used to being the decision maker. I'm used to saying, this is what we're going to do and here's how we're going to do it. Now let's, come on everyone, let's get it done. governance boards do not operate like that.
No.
And it can really be a mismatch. And equally with mentoring as well, I think, because many people in corporate leadership roles do a lot of formal and informal mentoring, and performance didn't really matter, the quality of the outcomes didn't really matter, or they simply find that I don't want to talk to people about these topics. It's not what I want to do. It's actually what I wanted to step away from. Sometimes you don't know this until you get into it, and then you think, actually, there's nothing I like less than being paid to stand and speak in front of an audience, which is, as you know, very demanding and difficult, takes a lot of preparation and a lot of practice. I personally don't really love it, even though I find myself doing it. So there's all these unknowns. We think we would like to come in one day a week. Maybe we actually find that really frustrating, because one day a week it takes too long to get to know how the business really operates, and you just can't have that much of an impact. So then you might say, well, I'm interested in coming in 4 days a week, but for a 12-week period to get a particular piece of work done. And these things you won't know until you get in and try it. So it is a process that takes some time, and it's going to evolve as well.
Yeah.
Because once you're in this way of working, then all kinds of opportunities are going to surface. And as you said, that's why you need to be visible. People need to see what it is you're doing.
That's it.
To say, oh, well, come and join my advisory board, or come into my business one day a week, or whatever the options might be.
Yeah.
I always say, if people don't know who you are and the value that you can deliver, they are not going to offer you anything.
No, and invisibility is not an option. And, sure, you might have the old boys network type thing might have served you well, but that's not going to bring in opportunities from left field necessarily. So, no, it's all good advice, Wendy. Thank you very much. And one thing I'll point you there too is that, it sounds like a lot of introspection and self-awareness is going to be critical, but also, as you don't know what you don't know. You might take something on and being open to the fact that it might not be right, but how can you structure it so it is right for you and what you're trying to achieve? So you kind of got to know yourself really, really well. And, again, it's taking you out of your comfort zone that you've probably been in for decades, and it's a whole new world for you.
Well, absolutely it is. But as I say, it's usually a positive experience. And that's, people like me, we keep you company along the way. So it isn't lonely and isolating, but instead it's about opportunities blossoming and things flowering that you might have thought were not a possibility for you, but we can make them a possibility.
Lots of exciting things. I think that's the more the take out there. That yes, there's some challenges, but I think the upshot is that you get your life probably back on your terms, which for a lot of people they probably haven't had, and they've got more flexibility and they can do the things they love doing, and they're all good things. Work with the people they want to work with and be more in control of what it is they do professionally, which I think is a great thing. What's the best way people can catch up with you? You're on LinkedIn, obviously, and the website that people can check you out on.
Yes, LinkedIn is probably the best way to contact me, and as you say, to look at the content that I post. It gives you it's designed to help you understand what it would be like to work with me, the way that I talk and the point of view that I bring. As I said, it's about getting outcomes. It really isn't about navel gazing. It's about how do we make this happen for you in the most efficient way, because I'm all about making it happen, getting the result. That's one of the beautiful things about working in consumer goods, is the way that I did was we could do anything in terms of PR promotions, but it had to show up at the supermarket register. If it didn't, that was a problem. So I would bring that same discipline to the work that I do now.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Wendy. It's a great conversation to have.
Thank you, Trevor. I hope it's been useful for your listeners.